Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of Anime Audio Commentary. This episode marks 2 years since I started this podcast, and I've had a great time doing it ever since, and I just want to thank you for embarking on this journey with me. Today, I'll be commenting on Little Witch Academia, The Enchanted Parade. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So right away, we sort of, we get back to some of my favorite parts from the original OVA, and that's Susie, I guess, preparing to cause trouble with her mushrooms and poisons and various stuff like that. So the witches seem to be in a potions class or something to that effect. Fusion magic, I guess. And, Susie wants to introduce a poisonous mushroom. In spectacular fashion, Akko has decided that like a little forest spread is probably a good thing to put in there. You know, I feel like mixing a forest sprite and a poisonous mushroom is probably not a good course of action. I kind of feel bad for Lot, because she's really the only mitigating influence these two have. And she's really just sort of, mild and weak-willed. You know, she can't really wrangle the two of them to prevent them from causing the trouble they normally do. Oh dear, so it seems like things have really gotten out of hand now. You know, they've created a giant mushroom monster and they've gotten themselves subsumed into it. You know, you gotta imagine this is like a nightmare for a school like Lunanova, you know. Magical OSHA's gonna be kicking in their doors any day now, saying like, okay, why do you have students messing around with stuff like this? So as is perhaps typical, only the teacher and Diana, and by extension her lackeys, have sort of been spared from the onslaught of this mushroom monster, mainly by virtue of, I guess, acting with good initiative. I rather like how they've animated the magic in this. It does seem like reasonably spectacular. I like how it looks. But I do find it very interesting that Diana is sort of acting on par with the teacher here. You know, it really sort of cements the idea that Diana is better than everyone. And whether or not she truly does think of herself as better, and it's my opinion that she does, you know, everyone certainly treats her like that. And it's probably not to everyone's benefit, honestly. Speaking of not acting to everyone's benefit, you know, Akko and Susie are still arguing about ingredients, while everyone else seems to be preparing the proverbial firing squad. You know, it comes as little surprise that this isn't the first time they've been dragged into a teacher's office. You know, they seem to have just been causing trouble all day long. You know, I gotta say, again, I feel bad for Lot, because she's seemingly just being dragged along by virtue of not distancing herself from them, and not really advocating for herself or taking a strong role in mitigating them. I mean, I guess you kind of get what you get if you're not willing to stand up, but at the same time, in my mind, it doesn't feel right to punish her along with the others. So this is where the punishment comes into play here. There's going to be a big magical festival going on, and naturally they're going to get, like, the worst possible grunt work. Oh, well, that's interesting. So they're being tasked with organizing the parade. That strikes me as a bad idea. You know, considering how they just seem to cause trouble, one would think you should get someone with actual organizational skills to organize things. Although, based on this footage we're seeing, you know, it seems like the parade here is more like making fun of witches and how they used to be treated. I.e., you know, people throwing things at them in the street, you know, drowning them for being guilty of witchcraft. You know, it's basically like reenacting the witch trials in Salem and the Middle Ages and all that. So I guess this is interesting in that it's sort of like an annual event they hold, like, you know, we have to remember this important history, you know, the witch trials were not good business. But at the same time, putting 3 reprobates in charge of organizing what is a big important thing seems like, well, a fool's errand, you know. It feels like the teacher sentencing them to this punishment is the sort of student who would have screwed up all the time, you know. It's like that saying, like, those who can't do teach, you know, implying that the only people who become teachers are people who can't hack it in any other field or industry. So this segment is interesting here in that we're being introduced to a trio of secondary characters who, as it were, are also sentenced to the same punishment. You know, on the one hand you have a thief, on the other hand you have a technical savant, and lastly you have a food thief. So we're sort of like covering an interesting set of bases here in terms of character archetypes. I feel really bad for Lot in that she really is the only person who doesn't fit in with this group. Because you have the chronic loser in Akko, the sort of like the creepy weird girl in Susie, the food thief, the regular thief, and the person who's engaging in something that is entirely anathema to witches, and they're all sort of lumped together with Lot, who's otherwise, you know, a good, law-abiding student. So, you know, on the one hand, I think Akko's got a good idea here. You know, you could try and make this festival as happy as possible. You know, yeah, it's depicting, like, burning witches at the stake and stuff like that, but there's no reason that it has to be so incredibly dreary. On the other hand, that she's so intent on roping Shiny Chariot into this, it seems like that's a bit too heterodox, especially considering that the witches of Luna Nova appear to be exceedingly conservative in terms of tradition. So I can already see how things are shaping up here. You know, Akko is sort of taking a lead role she's like the idea person and she's assigning roles to everyone else. And it seems like she's really stuck a lot with the biggest burden of all, being the project manager. So basically, she's the person who will get blamed when everything goes belly up. And, you know, it really seems pretty inevitable that it will. So like she was saying earlier, Amanda, knows how to dance, and so naturally she'll teach everyone else how to do it. I feel like this was just sort of an excuse to animate something kind of flashy, you know? One has to wonder how precisely that's going to figure into the parade. As, I feel like it's pretty darn against the spirit of things to have witches doing all sorts of, borderline pole dancing maneuvers like that. I mean, I guess it's sort of a mix between that and, what do you call it? Color guard, where you twirl batons and do all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, nobody really has much aptitude for this kind of thing, and I feel like Amanda's not really the type of person who'd be able to teach anyone properly, or in a way that's conducive to their skill set. Oh dear. So Susie, her idea of making this whole thing work is basically just sort of infecting everyone with mushroom spores. I almost find it more disturbing that she's sort of, come up with a storyboard of how this whole thing would unfold. And I guess even worse than that, Akka's like, this could work. You could have mushroom monsters attack the townsfolk to give Shiny Cherry an excuse to show up and vanquish them. That would be cool and in line with her vision, but I feel like putting the town in danger sort of goes against the spirit of the whole thing. I feel like that would just sort of justify witch hunts and the witch trials and all that if, in their misguided attempt to play hero, the witches were to put the entire town in danger. So people are finally making some, reasonable suggestions in that we get help from someone else. We ask Diana. But obviously there's an issue of pride here. Akko is too prideful to ask for help. Diana is too prideful to offer it or even acquiesce. Naturally, this is just going to turn into a headbutting competition here. So I find it interesting here that Diana's even saying, the whole idea of the parade is bad. I would think she would have been in support of it and doing, an extremely conservative parade. But I guess she's of the mind that, the whole thing is essentially glorifying the oppression of witches, and therefore, it's not something they should do. I feel like this is, in a way, the final straw here. Diana said some pretty foul things, and that's only made Akko even more determined to get this whole thing to work out. And in all likelihood, this is to everyone's detriment. So this is an interesting little bit of development for Lot, in that she's showing a bit of character. She's conferring with, I guess, like a little sprite or something, a little will-o'-the-wisp or something like that. And she's also, pretty capable of singing. And not just singing, but singing a song that these little spirits really enjoy. I mean, I guess it's only natural she'd be shy about that sort of thing, considering her character. Alright, so I'm noticing something here. Akko's vision for the parade won't work because magic only works within the proximity of the Sorcerer's Stone. So if that's not around, they need to find some alternate source or move the Sorcerer's Stone. And I feel like that's almost the sort of thing Akko would be willing to try to make her parade work out. It's most certainly not a good thing, but when did a bad idea ever stop anyone from doing something? Oh dear. Well, I was gonna say it was kind of nice about how Akko was encouraging her about her singing, but considering that she destroyed her music score. Oh dear, I feel like things have gotten that much more tense. Man, I feel like that's gonna have some bad ramifications. If Lot is no longer willing to sort of wrangle this doomed expedition, I feel like it's only gonna go that much worse. Like, it really seems like there's lasting static between the two of them. So Susie's talking a fair bit of sense here, too. If somebody like Lot is getting not only angry, but lastingly angry, he must have done something pretty bad. And she's also sort of bringing up that, like, for this to blow up as bad as it did, it probably doesn't help that Akko was shoving ideas everywhere about everything. So I guess what we have here is sort of the dichotomy between idealism and pragmatism. Because on the one hand, Akko has a lofty ideal about showing everyone how cool witches are, but at the same time she's not paying any attention to the practicality of the parade, therefore dooming the whole thing. So, Lot wants to do the parade as it was, and while that's certainly, rote and boring, it is manageable. And it would be better to have a boring, manageable parade than no parade at all at the rate things are going. And there really is trouble in paradise here. Akko, Susie, and Lan have all fallen out with each other. I mean, I imagine it's only going to be temporary, but at the same time, it's a rather distressing turn of events. You know, one has to wonder how the dynamic is going to shift. Like, is Akko going to hang out with Amanda and the others now, or what's the deal with that? Because, I mean, like, Akko really is basically like a perpetual outsider, in that she really has no talent at anything magical related. And I don't know, she doesn't really have the social skills to make friends very well, or very easily. So I feel like this is going to be an inciting incident for something, in that the local kids are, jerks, and they're a little too eager to start throwing rotten fruit at witches. I feel like this is only going to end poorly for all involved, but especially for Akko. I guess to make matters worse, it really seems like they're messing around nearby some sort of monument here. You know, like a couple pillars. I feel like they might be messing around with something better left alone. I mean, I guess it also doesn't help that the kids are merely throwing rotten tomatoes, and the witches are using, like, actual magic. You know, Amanda was levitating that one kid off the ground. I feel like that's a good way to get really injured. Especially considering he looked like he landed on his neck. You know, that's not good. The human body is, like, imminently breakable. And you don't want to mess around with your spinal cord. Uh-oh. Alright, yeah, this is getting really bad now. They're starting to, like, actually hit each other with sticks and things. Yeah, now I've got a real bad feeling about how this is gonna turn out. They just sort of, like, left that mess at that monument. I feel like that's gonna bode really poorly for their future at the school. So I guess it makes sense that none of this really helped Akko's mood, and she's certainly in no mood to head back to her roommates. Alright, so I'm noticing something here. You know, the mayor is really dead set on removing that monument, so they don't even need to clean it up. And allegedly it is a sealing stone of an ancient witch. Really seems to me that when you start messing around with stuff like that, only bad things happen. Now, this is sort of like one of those depictions of, like, the conflict between magic and technology, in that it's like a backhoe that's sort of digging away at this stone, and magic is starting to seep out. Alright, so now we're setting things up perfectly so that Diana and Akka might have a bit of a talk here. Hopefully, Diana won't come down too hard on her, but I don't know, she's taking kind of a neutral approach here, like, you shouldn't be here this time of night, but I'll take that back, she's rubbing it in. Uh-oh. I think Diana has accidentally given her an idea and not in a good way. You know, she's sort of like finally putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with an answer of 4. You know, it seems like the shiny rod has absorbed some of the Sorcerer's Stone power, and perhaps it could be used as like an alternate battery, as it were. So considering how it seemed like that old witch Jennifer was popping out of the ground, I feel like the shining rod might be, I don't know, something she might want to get her hands on in a real bad kind of way. And I guess to Akko's credit, she's really burning the midnight oil, studying, making plans. And it seems like for better or for worse, Diana lit a fire under her, and now, if only out of spite, she's determined to make this parade a success. She's really doing everything by herself here, you know, lighting off the fireworks, and having them create rather spectacular patterns. She's even animating the broomsticks a la... oh, what was that old Disney cartoon? The Sorcerer's Apprentice, I think, maybe? You know, where Mickey Mouse decided to, like, animate the brooms to do all the cleaning up so he wouldn't have to. Well, it seems like against all odds, she's managed to do the entire project herself, mostly, and she sort of made like an effort to reconcile with her friends. You know, she delivered, I guess, flyers. She tried to repair lots. What would you call it? Manuscript? Her music, essentially. She's even building a ship, and at great, you know, physical effort, too, albeit magically. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like she has the stamina to sort of make it work and hold the entire ship together. Like, I'd imagine that would take a pretty large effort of will here. You know, shipbuilding's... well, I mean, it's an art in and of itself, because you have to, like, bend and shape the wood. So I do find it interesting that Professor Ursula hasn't really checked in at all on it. One would think she should have at least taken, like, a cursory glance to see how things were going, but, you know, far be it from anyone in authority at this school to do their job. So I feel like it's a little late in the game to be testing this portion of the project. You know, using the shiny rod to harness the Sorcerer's Stone's power. I mean, I guess it is working, and thank God for that, otherwise this whole thing would be a bust. But I guess in my mind, this would be one of the first things I would test just to ensure that it can be done. You know, it's sort of like along the principle of you want to make sure like a power grid can provide power before you start running critical loads on it. And even now, like right before the parade, they're still essentially testing it out, you know, making sure that the shiny rod can act as a proxy battery. And fortunately, it does seem to be working out. You know, as down as everyone is on Akko about how stupid she generally is, you know, it seems like this was an inspired idea. And, you know, like it or not, she did have, if nothing else, the determination to implement it. You know, that's really not nothing. So unfortunately, it seems as though Lot and Susie still aren't on board with this whole thing. That's a shame. I mean, they did sort of blow up at each other, so I guess it's kind of understandable, but if there were any good time to reconcile, this would certainly be it. Uh-oh. So I guess this is how things start going wrong. They accidentally released the fireworks a little bit early, so, you know, they have to go along with the parade now. And they definitely can't wait for Susie or Lot. Oh dear. So even though the parade's just starting, you know, the crowd doesn't really seem to be down with the idea of it. I mean, at the very least, we're only seeing, like, those kids from before, so obviously they don't really like it. I guess the crowd at least seems open, which is fair considering that this is a pretty sizable production. I mean, like, they have this whole float sort of thing, like a parade float, but it's a ship. You know, they're throwing out candy, they've got choreographed dancing. I mean, like, even Diana sort of, almost relents, saying, like, you know, I thought this was gonna be bad, but it looks like it's going pretty well. I mean, she wasn't as verbose as that, but it's nice that she can admit that she's wrong. So naturally, those punk kids aren't content to let a good thing happen. They've sort of latched onto the idea that the shiny rod is the nexus of this whole thing, that if they steal that, it'll disrupt the entire thing. Unfortunately, the kids seem to be playing a successful game of keep away. And I'd imagine that if the shiny rod gets too far away from the parade, the whole thing will start to crumble. Uh-oh. Yeah, I feel like this kid's done something real bad here. He's brought that battery over to the sealed witch, and I'd imagine she's not going to take too kindly. So Diana has immediately understood what the problem is here. The legendary sealing stone has been given magical power. But one has to wonder why nobody at Luna Nova had sort of realized, hey, the town is, ripping up this sealing stone thing. Maybe it would be a good idea if they didn't do that. But unfortunately, it's too little too late now. Yeah, things are not good. The witch's magic is sort of infecting and animating everything. And not in a good way. I feel like Ursula is sort of unfairly blaming Akko for all of this. So she's sort of I guess to her credit, playing this up like it's part of the parade, saying hey, we need to pretend to be heroic witches to save the day. And it's probably not a good thing that they're putting Akko in the hot seat here about having to decide what to do. I feel like if she has all this time to sort of holler and play up the melodrama for the crowd, Ursula would perhaps be able to help out, especially considering that she knows how dire the situation truly is. Man, that was a damn fool stunt to catapult yourself directly into the rock face. That's a good way to, frankly, die. The human body's not designed to accelerate suddenly. Oh dear. Per usual, Akko gets left to twist in the wind, but... Oh no, I take that back. Susie did decide to show up eventually. It's nice that she decided to try and reconcile things. Alright, maybe reconcile is a bit strong. She can't help but sort of tease Akko a little bit. So they sort of have to, continue the game of keep away now, except they're all in on it, because if the witch gets a hold of the shiny rod, it's basically all over. That's the only weapon they have that can really put a dent in anything. And they're definitely not in a good position now, because, as far as anyone really knows, only Akko can use it. And even that's kinda limited. and marginal. You know, I feel like if she could readily use it, she would have been doing it by now. Oh dear. You know, that almost reminds me of, like, classic Looney Tunes, where, you know, you keep running, you run off a cliff, but you don't realize you're no longer treading on solid ground. It's nice that Lot chose this moment to show up. You know, basically when all seems more or less lost, and she's able to sort of, captivate all the magical spirits and, calm them down, I guess. I mean, in one fell swoop, she managed to undo the vast majority of the trouble that Big Witch had caused. Certainly impressive, if nothing else. You know what? I think that's a pretty nice signifier of their friendship. Lot handmade her a hat. You know, a replica of Shiny Chariot's hat. You know, that's certainly not something I would have assumed she would have done, considering the terms they were on before. So there we have it, I guess. Friendship fixed, you know. They all recognize they are of different temperaments, but in a sense they balance each other out, so it's all good. Of course, the witch isn't really content to just sit around and wait anymore. This is an interesting little scene where she sort of, like, subsumes a bunch of other material into her form. I mean, I wouldn't really assume that this creature is a witch, per se. I'd say something more like a giant or a golem or a titan or something like that. You know what, Ursula saved the mayor, but he really doesn't deserve it considering how he was content to just tear down the ceiling stone. I mean, I guess it's nice that she took a break from narrating events to sort of, do something. But at the same time, she's also putting everything squarely on Akko, Lot, and Susie's shoulders, saying, you know, it's all on these three witches to save the day. So just like the beginning of the film, they do have a method for handling this giant witch, and that would be the nullification spell. Unfortunately, we were told that it's, you know, it's really, something you have to be an expert to use. So whether or not these three can use it is, well, it's not really something you can take as read. But I guess fortunately for all involved, they do have the shiny rod at their disposal, which is effectively a source of unlimited magical power. So I guess in a sense, Akko sort of got, like, the show she wanted, in that she's sort of taking on the role of Shiny Chariot, harnessing everyone's belief and using it as her own power. I guess it's a bonus for the audience that this whole thing ended up being so theatrical. This is a nice little sequence, how the shiny rod transforms into a weapon capable of slaying such a gigantic creature. Rather than just being a bow, it's more of a ballista. You know, an artillery piece. I also find it interesting that rather than slaying the witch outright, it just sort of, puts her to sleep, presumably so they can seal her again. She also looks far less threatening when she's sleeping. I find that interesting. Well, I guess everything worked out well in the end. You know, they managed to defeat the witch just in time for the shiny rod to expend all of its power. And, they are aware the mayor was at fault here, so they're just sort of, hoping everything sort of plays out well in the end, without anybody really getting in trouble for it. Well, I guess the mayor is willing to preserve culture when it benefits him. And it really is remarkable that, on all accounts, the parade turned out well. You know, even though catastrophe nearly occurred. I mean, Diana can't help herself but get in one last word. You know, yeah, you did stop that witch, but your spellcasting was sloppy and you should be ashamed. I mean, even those kids are sort of turning over a new leaf in that they got their bacon saved, so maybe they shouldn't throw rotten fruit at witches anymore. Well, you know what, maybe I spoke a little bit too soon. They're still not above throwing fruit at witches. I mean, I guess they're doing it more in, out of a sense of good fun now, rather than malice. Alright, well, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.